This is going to be my second video update coming to you from Athens, Greece. And I'm doing this video about a couple of hours removed from my morning update in the hot sun of Athens. I can't wait for winter. Am I the only European, the only EU citizen saying, God, I can't wait for winter. But let's get to some news. And I really want to talk about the Moscow Conference for International Security, the Moscow Security Conference. This is the 10th year of this conference, which brings together military officials, world leaders, CEOs of military companies, think tank strategists, just basically people in and around the security, military, war space. And we are having this conference once again taking place in Moscow. And the reason this is news is because we had opening speeches from the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Russian President Vladimir Putin. And they had some very interesting things to say. So let's begin with the president, Russian President Vladimir Putin. Let's listen to what he had to say during his speech at the Moscow Security Conference. Let me pull it up here. The U.S. wants the Ukraine conflict to drag on for as long as possible, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said, and I'm taking these excerpts from RT. Quote, the situation in Ukraine demonstrates that the U.S. is trying to prolong this conflict, Putin stated at the conference in Moscow on Tuesday. Putin reiterated that Moscow launched its military operation in Ukraine in late February in order to, quote, ensure the security of Russia and its citizens and defend the people of Donbass from genocide. The president said the U.S. has, quote, set the role of cannon fodder for Ukrainians, implemented the anti-Russia project in Ukraine, turned a blind eye to the spread of neo-Nazi ideology, to mass murder of the people of Donbass, adding that the U.S. has been, quote, pumping the Kiev regime with weapons, including heavy weapons, and continues to do so, end quote. So obviously the most interesting part of that speech for Putin was his statement saying that the collective West, the United States, is essentially using Ukraine military as cannon fodder to fight a war against Russia. Now, let's talk about what the Russian Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu, had to say at the conference. And I'm just going to read you off some bullet points from his speech. These translated bullet points, these English translated bullet points, come from the Telegram channel of Donbass Debushka, and this is what Sergei Shoigu said. NATO has dropped its masks. The bloc's aggressive nature has ceased to be hidden. The claim to global dominance has been consolidated. Russian military personnel in Ukraine are confronted by the combined forces of the West, which control the leadership of this country in a hybrid war against Russia. We know for certain that no one in NATO has any doubts that the goals of the special operation in Ukraine set by the Russian leadership will be achieved. The operation of the Russian armed forces dispelled the myth about the super weapon that the West supplies to Ukraine, and which is supposedly capable of turning the tide at the front. And the losses of the Ukrainian troops and the territorial defense are huge. The Kiev leadership hides the real numbers. So a lot of interesting statements from the speech via the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, as translated from Russian into English. And basically he's In the speech, he said that the Wonder Weapon HIMARS have done very little to impact the situation on the ground, to turn the tide of the war. Shoigu also said that Russia is carefully inspecting a lot of the weapons, the Western weapons that they have captured, and they're studying their features. That was an interesting statement as well. And he also said, Shoigu also said, according to RT, one second here, let me get the quote. He also said that there's no need for nuclear weapons in Ukraine. The use of nuclear weapons is restricted to emergencies only, as outlined in Russian guidelines that are publicly available. And Shoigu said that claims of possible use of chemical weapons in Ukraine are absurd too, since Russia destroyed its stockpile in an effort that was completed in 2017. False accusations of such attacks have been used by Western-backed groups in Syria in the past, Shoigu added. So that was also an interesting claim there, talking about how the use of chemical weapons is actually something that Western-backed groups have used in Syria, not Russia. Russia has no desire, no capability to use chemical weapons, and that chemical weapons were actually used by the West in Syria. I also find it interesting that Shoigu said in the speech that operations are essentially being planned in Washington and London, and Ukraine gets all of their marching orders from the collective West. Specifically, Washington, I understand that, but London, he put a lot of emphasis and weight on London as well. He said that Western countries are responsible for the death of civilians in the Donbass. So he kind of echoed what Putin said in his speech, due to the supply of Western weapons. Shoigu also said that any plans by the West to weaken Russia, to economically weaken Russia, are failing. I'll get into that in a bit. And then he talked about NATO dominance, global dominance as waning, how NATO claims it has dominance in Africa, Asia Pacific region, the Middle East, and how this dominance is starting to diminish. And NATO has no doubts. He said NATO has no doubts that the goals of the special operation set by the Russian Federation will be achieved. So, both Putin and Shoigu are saying that NATO knows that Russia is winning, has won, and will win, but yet they continue to egg on Zelensky and the Ukraine military to continue to fight. And Shoigu also said that the losses of Kiev are huge. Now, I've gotten a lot of numbers sent to me from various people who are very close to things on the ground in Donbass. And while I can't confirm the numbers that I've been receiving, they sound about right. And let me tell you, the number of losses, of casualties for Ukraine is astonishing. It's tragic, and it just absolutely floored me when I looked at the numbers. But if you go back and kind of just take the statements of Zelensky and some very high-level Ukrainian officials who have said that the casualty numbers, they're on record saying that the casualty numbers are around 100 to 700 a day. That's the range of casualties that we've gotten from top Ukraine military officials, Zelensky government officials, and even Zelensky himself. The daily casualty numbers, 100 to say 700, 800 a day. And you multiply that over 30 days and then multiply that over, say, 5 to 6 months, you kind of get an idea as to the casualty rate that the Ukraine military has and is suffering. And then if you further take into consideration that this is an artillery war being completely dominated by Russia, the fact that the Ukraine military is now having to move reserves, military assets from the west to the east in order to compensate for all the losses suffered in the east, in Donbass. You also get an even better understanding as to the as to the casualties being suffered by the Ukraine military. And this is why you're seeing so much panic from the collective West and from the Zelensky regime. This is why you see crazy speeches and statements now almost daily, being given daily by Zelensky. And I mean, his speeches and his statements are getting crazier and crazier with each passing day. The hysteria from the collective West, as we talked about with the Guardian article from Simon Tisdale, the statements from the collective West are getting more and more desperate from the neocons and the neoliberals. The only thing they have left now are taking out Putin, as they put it, taking down Putin. And the only sanctions weapons that they have left are, and they're not even sanctioned weapons, to be honest, it's just outright racism, bigotry, and discrimination is an all-out blanket travel ban for Russians wanting to visit the EU. I mean, this is what the collective West has been reduced to. This is all they have left. And this is what Shoigu was hinting at by saying that the war being waged on an economic level has also failed. So very interesting statements from the Moscow Security Conference, the 10th annual conference in Moscow, from Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. And let's talk about some more news, which I find interesting. And this comes from Mali. And that is that the French military has abandoned, they have tucked tail, and they have left Mali. The final French soldiers left the Gao military base in northern Mali on Monday, ending a 9-year counterterrorism mission by France in its former colony. While French troops were invited into Mali to fight Islamism, relations with the African country's government later turned sour. Today at 1 o'clock Paris time, the final contingent of the Barkhane forces still on Malian territory crossed the border between Mali and Niger, read a statement from the French military referring to Operation Barkhane, the code name of its Malian mission. So France is out, but the interesting part is that, from what I understand, and I don't know much about the situation in Mali, so please forgive me for that, but from what I understand, France is out, but Russia and Wagner are in. What does that tell you? What does that signal with regards to the military shift, the military power shift of things? What does that tell you with regards to the narrative that Russia has used up 80% of their military resources fighting in Ukraine, when I tell you that France has had to leave Mali, and Russia, specifically the Wagner Group, which are Russian contract soldiers, Russian mercenaries, but still loosely associated with Russia, that the Wagner Group and Russian military assets, I say that loosely, Russian military assets are remaining in Mali and will remain in Mali. That tells me a lot. We also have news that the United States is refusing to return Afghan foreign currency reserves. Now, this is an interesting story, and this leads into my next story. But as we saw the collective West steal around 300 billion, give or take, whatever kind of numbers you look at, let's say 300 billion in Russian foreign currency reserves during the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, we have news that U.S. President Joe Biden's administration has reportedly opted against releasing $7 billion in Afghan central bank assets, deciding to keep the funds frozen due to concern that the currently Taliban-ruled country is again harboring international terrorists. So they're using the excuse, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but they are using the excuse. They're going with the fact that that Afghanistan is now harboring terrorists, and that's why we will not return $7 billion worth of foreign currency assets. All this is going to do is further damage the collective West financial architecture, because with each country that the US or the UK steals their assets, their foreign currency reserves, with each country that they do this to, every other country outside of the collective West is going to be looking at all these actions and saying, we got to get the hell out. We got to get our money, our gold, our foreign assets out of the United States, because they're going to do this to us. Plain and simple. So this is not looking good for the financial architecture, the financial system of the collective West. It is not a good look at all. And that is why, my final story before I get to my clown world, that is why Russia is now offering partners, friendly countries, not unfriendly countries, friendly countries. Russia is offering them the ability to transact in their SWIFT alternative known as the SPFS. Moscow wants to boom volume of settlements in national currencies. The country's economic development minister, Maxim Reshtnikov, said on Tuesday, and that is why Russia has offered countries belonging to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, to join its financial messaging system, the SPFS. Remember that acronym, the SPFS. This is shaping up to be a viable SWIFT alternative. And, well, let me read you what Reshetnikov said. In order to ensure uninterrupted cooperation between our banks, we suggest that members of the organization join the Russian financial messaging system. This is what he said at an SCO forum in Uzbekistan. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important first and foremost because where in the past you didn't have a SWIFT competitor, now you do have a SWIFT competitor. Not good for the collective West. It's important from the standpoint of the collective West financial system monitoring the movement of money and the movement of funds across borders. With the SWIFT system, the U.S. financial system, the deep state, Washington, D.C., they were able to monitor how money was moving around. Now, the fact that countries will be leaving the SWIFT system and going to the SPFS means that that the collective West will not be able to monitor how funds are moving. They won't be able to see how people, companies, countries are moving their money around. They're in the dark now. This is huge. This is a really, really big deal. They have shot themselves in the foot here. And finally, the importance of this alternative to SWIFT is that Russia will be able to get a lot of countries to jump on board and use the SWIFT alternative. They'll be able to get a lot of adoption to this alternative because Russia will be able to leverage their dominance in natural resources and commodities. So Russia is going to be able to approach friendly countries and the countries in, say, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and other institutions outside of the collective West financial architecture. They'll be able to approach them and say, look, you want to buy gas, you want to buy oil, you want to buy wheat, fertilizer, all of these things that we dominate. You want to buy these things and trade in these things? Great, we'll give them to you. We will offer them to you. You can trade outside the dollar, another huge, massive deal. You can trade outside of the dollar in your own currency, and better yet, we'll give you the technology, the messaging system to do that. Outside the SWIFT, so you don't have to worry about Washington, D.C. monitoring your every move. And this is going to be big. This is going to probably be very big for weapons sales as well. That's where my mind is going. The fact that you can now trade outside of SWIFT and move certain products without DC getting a sniff of what you're doing. I think this is going to change the landscape with regards to the movement of weapons as well. So with that said, let's do a clown world. And in this clown world, I am going to talk about the Iranian tanker I don't know if you remember the story about the Iranian tanker seized by the Greek authorities at the behest of the Biden White House. That happened about a month ago. And Greek authorities, they seized an Iranian tanker. They then, under the orders of the United States, forced that tanker to dock in a Greek port, and then had a U.S. ship dock right next to that tanker and start removing the oil from that Iranian tanker. In other words, just pure robbery, right? The Greek authorities seize an Iranian oil tanker. They then have the Americans come in and start taking over the cargo, taking over that oil on that tanker. Greece got nothing out of this, by the way. They didn't get any oil. They didn't get anything out of this robbery. This is like the first robbery committed by, facilitated by Greece, where the country that facilitates the robbery gets nothing in return, not a kickback, nothing. The U.S. basically came in and they started offloading the oil on this tanker. Well, the Iranians, they seized 2 Greek tankers in retaliation, and they still have those tankers. So that's how Iran retaliated. They said, okay, Greece, at the behest of the Biden White House, you're going to seize an oil tanker of ours and then steal the cargo. Well, we're going to seize 2 oil tankers of yours. And these oil tankers, from what I understand, are still with Iran. So Greece still has not had those oil tankers. But to make matters even worse and more embarrassing for Greece, the Supreme Court of Greece has ruled that the cargo of this Iranian oil tanker needs to be returned back to Iran. And this confiscated oil tanker, the actual tanker itself, the ship, has to be allowed to sail back to Iran as well. So I'm taking this from Gatimerini, which is a super pro Mitsotakis neoliberal neocon publication, EU globalists to the max. And they're even reporting on this. And they're saying that an Iranian flag tanker has retrieved an oil cargo which the United States had confiscated and is set to leave Greece. Sources familiar with the matter said on Monday, the seizure from the Lana, formerly the Pegas, prompted Iranian forces in May to seize 2 Greek tankers in the Middle East Gulf, which have not yet been released. The United States had hired a tanker in April to impound the oil on board the Lana tanker, which had been anchored off Greece. The oil was then partly removed and placed aboard the ICE Energy tanker, which had been chartered by Washington and had been expected to sail to the United States before Greece. The Supreme Court ruled that the cargo should be returned to Iran. The reloading process is complete, quote, one of the sources said. Another source said it was completed on Sunday. The Embassy of Iran in Athens said on August 12th on Twitter that the vessel would sail to Iran after the reloading was completed. So, wow. Wow. What a clown world facepalm for the Mitsotakis Greek government. What a complete failure on their part. Not only do they look like stooges to the Biden White House, but they came away with this empty-handed. They embarrassed themselves. They lost 2 Greek ships to Iran, which they have yet to retrieve. And the Greek Supreme Court ruled against them and is now saying that all the oil has to be returned back to Iran, and the tanker also has to be allowed to leave the Greek ports. The U.S., they tried to steal the oil. They failed. That is a loss for the U.S., but what a big loss for the Greek government. But what a win. What an absolute win for the Greek legal system, because the Greek Supreme Court did the right thing. And good on the Greek Supreme Court. They did the right thing, and they said, this is not legal. You can't just seize an oil tanker and steal their oil and then give it to the Americans, or not even give it to the Americans, just allow the Americans to grab that oil. You can't do this. This is robbery. This is theft. And everything has to be returned. So while the Greek government ended up looking very embarrassed from this situation. The Greek legal system chalks up a big time win here. So good on the Greek legal system. The US, well, okay, they don't get the oil that they were trying to steal. They're going to move on to the next target for robbery, and Duran comes out the big winner from all of this. And they still have the 2 Greek ships, by the way. So that is the clown world. I will end this video there. My second video update, the Duran.locals.com. Take care, everybody.